Donald Trump and others have alleged that social media platforms are censoring conservatives. But are they? We'll find out through testing. In this video, we'll look at Twitter specifically. Is Twitter censoring conservatives? Before we get started, let's define an important term. Engagement rate. Engagement rate suggests the rate at which your followers engage with your tweets. On Twitter, this would be liking something, retweeting it, or replying to it. Now, because the free access to Twitter's API that I'm using for this study doesn't allow us to get reply information, we'll just discard replies and deal with only likes and retweets. So what percentage of your followers like a tweet that you give or retweet a tweet that you give? That's our measure for engagement rate. Now let's discuss a premise for this test. My premise is, if Twitter is censoring conservatives, then conservatives will experience diminished engagement rates on Twitter compared to other types of users. That is, fewer people will see conservative tweets if Twitter is trying to censor conservatives, if they're shadow banning conservatives or making their tweets less likely to be visible or to go viral, then conservative Twitter users will experience diminished engagement rates. That is, a lower percentage of their followers will like or retweet the things that they tweet. Let's talk methodology. How did I go about finding out whether or not this was true? First, I came up with 5 kinds of Twitter users. One kind, celebrities. Celebrities are people with no political valence that I could discern, but who are famous and have large numbers of followers. So these are people like Khloe Kardashian, The Rock, or Zendaya. These are famous actors or TV personalities or whoever, people who are famous but don't really talk a lot about politics. The next category of people I considered are people who I term the new right. New meaning they found their fame on new media, like the internet, YouTube, etc. And right meaning they have a right-leaning political valence. And of course, both of these things are judged by me. They're a bit subjective, but I try to judge them. So new right figures are people like Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder or Lauren Southern. Next category is old right figures. Old meaning they found their fame through old media. And right, again, meaning they have a right-leaning political valence. So these are people like Charles Murray, Britt Hume, Glenn Beck. They found their fame through old media, old meaning newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, etc. Then there's another category, the new left. These are people like Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks, Kyle Kulinski, Anita Sarkeesian, etc. And the final category is the old left. These are people like Rachel Maddow, Lawrence O'Donnell, or Trevor Noah. People who found their fame through TV, etc. TV, newspapers, magazines. For each of these categories, I found 10 figures that fit the description. I then collected, using Twitter's free access API, and I'll make the script I used available in the description, in the video description. I gathered the 3,000 most recent tweets for each of these figures, and I collected information about engagement rates for each of these tweets, meaning how many people liked, retweeted it, etc. Once I had this information, I then compiled it into an Excel document and calculated what I call the likes per follower or the retweets per follower as a measure of engagement rate. That is, this is the number of likes that a tweet gets divided by the follower count. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get historical information for follower counts. So follower counts will change over time. As a figure becomes more or less popular, they'll have more or fewer followers. So that makes the likes per follower and the retweets per follower measures a bit inaccurate, but it'll be consistently inaccurate for all of these figures. And I tried not to pick figures who had just recently become insanely popular. I also, when I was conducting my analysis, and I'll talk more about this later, I also shifted the dates of my analysis to look at narrower or wider bands to see if anything changed if I shifted the dates, which would indicate that perhaps there was a problem with my methodology of using likes per current follower. And I wasn't able to find anything indicating that it was a problem. Before we look at the analysis and I start to discuss what I found, it's important to note what my prior beliefs were going into this. That is, state what my priors are. Now, I actually expected that the new right figures would face censorship. And that's just from what I know about social media companies. I know they tend to have a left-wing bias. I know say they ban people for having extreme right-wing views, among other things. I know that the people who work there are mostly left-leaning, etc. So I more or less expected that they would be censoring especially new right-wing figures. What I honestly expected was that new right-wing figures would have low engagement rates, and that the old right-wing figures, the kind of traditional media conservatives, would not be facing censorship. And so I thought that was going to stand out pretty clearly in the results, but that's not what I found. So let's go ahead and take a look at these results in Excel. Now, obviously I have the raw tweets, the information about tweets, number of likes, retweets, etc., about 3,000 for each of these people. So I compiled them into a pivot graph using Excel. And using Excel, I could look at my measurements of engagement rates. I could look at the likes per follower, the retweets per follower for each of these tweets. And I could calculate the average likes per follow and retweets per follow to get an idea of engagement rate. So here are the results. Here's a table of the results. The first thing I found that was surprising is that celebrities actually have the lowest engagement rate as I'm measuring it out of any of the categories out of any of the groups of people that I measured. So I tried to answer, why is this? Why do celebrities have such a low engagement rate? And I sampled some celebrity tweets to get an idea. And the understanding that I now have after reading some celebrity tweets is that celebrities tend to use Twitter basically in the way it was originally intended. That is, they're just tweeting about their lives or how they feel or the mundane things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So celebrities have huge follower counts because they are famous for other things. They're famous singers or TV show people or personalities, actors, etc. So they have a huge following, and they just kind of tweet their mundane daily lives most of the time. And the result is that they have a low engagement rate. Their followers are there because those people are famous, not because they are particularly good at using social media. So an archetypal example would be a tweet from Ariana Grande, who just tweets, "I'm feeling silly today," or something like that. And, a lot of people see this tweet and they may be interested in knowing that she's feeling silly or whatever, but they're not necessarily going to like or retweet it. And that's the phenomenon that leads to celebrities having low engagement rates, at least according to my opinion, my analysis, and the tweets that I've seen and looked at. Let's jump into Excel to try and understand the broader results. This table is showing the average likes per followers and retweets per follower of each of the categories I discussed before. Here we have celebrities with likes per follower in blue, retweets per follower in orange. Here's the new left, the new right, the old left, and the old right. As I mentioned, celebrities tend to have the lowest engagement rates, and we can see that visually here. The most confusing result is that while new right figures have a higher percentage of likes per follower, the new left has a much higher retweet per follower average than the new right. It's not immediately obvious what this means. In order to understand more, let's take a look at some of the raw data to see if we can understand what it means when there's a large ratio of retweets to likes. So the new left has a really large ratio of retweets to likes. Let's see if we can understand why that is. In order to try and understand why that is, we'll look at the new left specifically, and we'll look at the likes to follow ratio. And we'll find some tweets that really exemplify the behavior where there's a lot of retweets to likes. In other words, a very small like to retweet ratio. And we'll see if we can understand why that's more common among the new left. So let's look at 5 tweets that evince this behavior we're interested in. That is, they have a very small like to retweet ratio. And we'll discard some of these tweets that have just very low numbers of likes and retweets in general, because they have such small numbers they won't be very representative. So we'll look at tweets like this one, this one, this one, and a few down here, and we'll see what they show us, what they have to teach us about the meaning of a low like to retweet ratio. So the general pattern here seems to be discussing negative events and making a call to action. Here, Linda Sarsour is retweeting a missing persons report, And it's easy to understand why you wouldn't really like that. Here's Sarah Zhang tweeting about ICE tracking license plate numbers, and we can understand why her followers wouldn't really like that tweet and why they'd be more inclined to retweet it. Again, Linda Sarsour tweeting about a missing child. Anna Kasparian is tweeting about an objection to paid maternity leave. So sure, it's believable that her followers don't like that tweet as much as they want to share it. And again, Anna Kasparian is talking about the Paris attacks where 60 people were killed. Another one is a fundraiser, a kind of call to action. Please help me get this, where it's more important to retweet a message than to like it. So her fans would be retweeting the message to spread it rather than just liking it, which isn't really going to be that helpful. In other words, it seems like what we're seeing is the high retweet to like ratio indicates important news, usually negative news, news that you disapprove of but that you want to share and you think is important. That's the pattern I'm seeing from these tweets. Now, we also note that the new right has a significantly higher likes per follower than the new left. In other words, the new left is kind of tweeting about things that their audience thinks is important, but that they disapprove of, that they want to spread and they want to share. Whereas the evidence from what we know right now seems to suggest that the new right is tweeting more about things their audience likes. So let's look at the top 5 like to retweet ratio for the new right, and see what we can learn from that. See if that's consistent with my interpretation so far. So here we'll look at the new right, and we'll sort the like to retweet ratio so that we're seeing the highest like to retweets. So here are some of the 5 highest like to retweet ratio tweets tweeted by members of the new right, to see if we can understand a bit more about the meaning of a high like to retweet ratio. Here's Dave Rubin tweeting that someone is coming soon to the Rubin Report. Here's Count Dankula congratulating somebody. Michael Knowles is replying to someone and copying Ben Shapiro. Roaming Millennial is talking about how she likes GIFs. Christina Summers is replying to somebody in the middle of a long conversation thread. And Lauren Southern is just replying to somebody with an emoji. So one immediate takeaway is that all 5 of these are replies. In other words, these are kind of context-specific things that get a lot of likes to retweets. So that makes sense because your followers can't really meaningfully retweet something if it relies on a lot of context, if it's buried in a thread of replies. So what I think this means, looking back at our graph, what I think this is indicating is that the new right figures are more likely than others to engage in these kind of dialogues or Twitter threads where they go deep into conversations where retweeting them wouldn't really make sense or wouldn't make as much sense. I think it's more likely that the new right is doing that more than the new left. So we do see that the retweets per follower value is suppressed in the new right versus the new left, but likes per follower is actually greater in the new right than in the new left. So I don't see this as evidence of Twitter doing some kind of secret shadow banning or suppression of conservative figures. Instead, it looks like the new right and the new left have different behaviors that result in different engagement metrics. But neither side is being unfairly suppressed from what I can tell. So to sum up, I can't say for certain that Twitter is not censoring conservatives. I don't know. They may have some shadow algorithm to keep conservatives down. And if it weren't for that, then conservative figures would have even greater engagement rates, even more popularity on the platform. That's certainly possible. But what I can say is that the testing I've done found no evidence of censorship from Twitter. I think it's a pretty fair hypothesis to say that if Twitter is censoring people, then they'll have suppressed engagement rates. And the finding that new conservative figures don't have suppressed engagement rates, that finding kind of disconfirms the original hypothesis, at least for me. In other words, I can't say that Twitter doesn't censor conservatives, but what I can say is that I found no evidence of it. Now, of course, there's a related point that they ban kind of new right figures, and an example of that might be InfoWars or Sargon of Akkad. And it's certainly true that Twitter does ban those people. And I think it's true that they tend to ban more right-leaning people than left-leaning people. And so that could have an influence on the idea of, is Twitter censoring conservatives? You could say, well, yeah, sure, look at InfoWars. They banned them. And InfoWars is, I suppose, conservative in some sense. So I don't really have an answer or any response to that challenge. More what my experiment was focused on is Twitter doing some kind of subtle, secret shadow banning or suppressing of conservatives? I can't say anything about what they explicitly do in terms of banning people or kicking them off the platform. Anyway, that's my investigation into the issue of, is Twitter censoring conservatives? Perhaps I'll look at other social media platforms next. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by clicking the like button. If you want to see more content in a similar style, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for your time.